welcome everyone who's joined us. And this is, as a reminder, primarily a get-together for the single points of contact for the Livery Climate Action Group companies. But I do know that because of the subject matter this evening, which is public lighting and recent developments in lower carbon solutions, we have a healthy representation, I think, from the Lightmongers company for obvious reasons. So welcome to the Lightmongers, even if you're not a Spock, that's fine. And any other guests that are joining for interest this evening. A quick bit of housekeeping too, to remind you of future events, and I'll remind you at the very end as well, if not Alison will. Our next Spock meeting, 5th of May, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m, listening to Averill on Beyond Solar and Wind. So that'll be one for the diary. And the other date for the diaries is the Livery Climate Action Group AGM on the 24th of June. And it'll be somewhere central London, late afternoon after the election of sheriffs. So keep that in the diary as well. More details will be forthcoming. So our three speakers this evening are, firstly, you'll hear from Graham Smith, who's the Master Lightmonger and Chief Exec of the Highway Electrical Association. Then he'll hand over to Perry Hazel. Perry is the Business Manager of Southwark Council, focusing on lighting and electric vehicle infrastructure. And then in turn, Perry will hand over to Ian Hughes, City of London Corporation's Operations Director for City Streets and Spaces. And interestingly, also overseeing the project to relight St. Paul's Cathedral. So that might be some interesting questions arising from that, Ian, if there's time at the end. So if I could ask Graham, first of all, to share his screen and the presentation.
Thank you for that, Gordon. But if I can just correct you, I'm not the Chief Executive of the Highway Electrical Association.
Beg your pardon.
But I was. I don't want to upset anybody straight away.
As good as.
So I've been asked to talk this evening about the impact in the transition to energy efficient lighting. And obviously, as we all know, that's pretty much LEDs. Over the past decade, the lighting industry has undergone a major technological transformation, and what used to rely heavily on incandescent lamps has now largely shifted to LEDs and the technology associated with it. So this shift has delivered significant energy savings, major reductions in carbon emissions, particularly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about residential environments, but Perry and the other speakers are going to go on to other things as well. So the idea being, I'm going to talk about how it has impacted your homes, because everybody can relate to that. Obviously, the LED revolution itself has come about with it's been a major achievement in the global lighting industry, where the entire supply chain has had to cooperate across various aspects. Obviously, there needed to be research and invention into the new technology, LED chips and array manufacturing, driver electronics, lamp and luminaire design, as well as manufacturers, distributors and retailers. And then, of course, there's also a very important supporting role for professional societies, trade associations, standard organisations and government regulators as well. Together, the whole supply chain has come along with rapid development, and standardisation has been adopted across the technology. So in terms of the evolution of the lighting technology, the traditional incandescent lamp used to effectively be a 60-watt power source. It then became a compact fluorescent, which was generally 11 watts. And as the LEDs developed, we were on 10 watts and now we're down to 8 watts with effectively the same light output. So the mix of technologies has also changed significantly. Back in 2010, most lamps were incandescents. By 2024, pretty much, and it's been forced on us really, we're down to LEDs. And this shift has meant an amazing change is using less electricity. And so this slide here looks at the number of dwellings in the UK in 2010. We were somewhere around 23 million dwellings in 2010. But in 2024, we were up to almost 30 million dwellings. And if you assume that each dwelling had 12 lamps within that dwelling, then the simple calculation is that it would have been 7.37 million tons of CO2 per year back in 2010. And if you continued with the same lamps today, that would be 9.57 million tons per year. Of course, with the energy efficient lighting, that has changed considerably. And what we've got it down to now is 7.75 million tons of electricity, but the amount of dwellings has increased, as I say, to almost 30 million dwellings. So that just gives you an idea of where we are with the development of new technology. And that's the end of my little bit. So I'll pass that over now to Perry Hazel.
I'll start. So just as a introduction, I am Perry Hazel. So as mentioned, I am the business manager for London Borough of Southwark. I'm also the immediate past president of the Institution of Lighting Professionals, so a professional engineering institution. So ultimately, where Graham has taken you through the domestic side of the property, I am hoping to take you on a journey through a more urban realm environment. So, and I always say to people, lighting is one of those things that I think no one really notices until it's not on. And that's when the floods of complaints normally come through to the council. So it's about maybe for myself showing you tonight what the lighting industry and the organisations like the Lightmongers and the Institution of Lighting Professionals have quietly been doing in the background to help London ultimately reduce energy, cut carbon and improve those public spaces over the last few decades. And I know Ian will move on to talk about some of the more affluent type stuff that he's up to in the city. So ultimately, why does lighting matter? So why have we got it? And I think it's not just about what you see. Lighting really can shape a city and how people engage with that city. So ultimately, initially, fundamentally, it's about safety and the perception of safety. If people feel more comfortable walking, traveling and socializing at night with good lighting present, they're likely to stay there. If it will help surveillance, so whether that's CCTV and police engagement, ultimately well-lit areas do reduce the fear of crime and they make those public spaces usable. So London itself has obviously got a really big nighttime economy. So whether that's restaurants, theatres, transport hubs, markets, I'm sure we all engage and use it. But none of those would function without safe and reliable lighting. So it just shows you we are really the backbone of day-to-day life in the city. And actually that commercial vitality about if we make the streets feel welcoming, people will stay longer and they will spend more and they will visit more. So it really is a key part of the city's life. So what does it look like in regards to infrastructure? So London at night, we've got over the boroughs, City London and TfL, we've got about 1.4 million streetlights. So just as a visualization, if you took the average height of those streetlights and laid them end to end, it would probably reach Tokyo. So there's a fair amount of structures that is condensed in quite a small geographical location, really. So it's amazing when you walk down streets and you see where lighting interacts and how much there is in the city. They run for roughly 4,000 hours a year. Obviously, in winter months, we've got longer nights, so they would be run harder. They're more important in the winter months because you've got busier times where obviously it gets darker earlier. Summer, we obviously have less, but it's quite a considerable amount of hours when you think each light is on for that period of time. So it's not really surprising to see when back in 2010, and I'll go on a little bit later on where we're at now, we were at roughly 650 million kilowatts per hour purely for street lighting in those London boroughs, City of London and TfL. So just as a fun fact, and I'm sure a few of you have got them on your table now, that's the equivalent of making around 6.5 billion cups of tea. So quite a substantial, important area for energy savings. So what does that LED transition look like? So over the last 2 decades, they've been replacing the traditional street lighting with LED technology. Graham spoke about that move between old tech to new tech. We've been doing the same. Some boroughs were early adopters and actually transitioned to different types of tech, not LED, but still made good savings. And now they're looking to do further developments and transition into LED. Actually, some still aren't. There's heritage areas and some constraints with types of lamp columns. We've actually got gas columns still live within Westminster specifically, and we still have gas engineers that go and light them up each night. So it's quite surprising that not everyone has gone this way, even though it's quite an easy or a big focus, at least for business cases, for changing these over. So I think going forward, it's not necessarily for us, we're nearly there on the LED conversion. It's about optimizing how we use those assets. And I'll talk about that nearer the end of presentation, where they're not just lights on the end of poles now. So what's the carbon impact been over that period of time? So obviously it comes from the operational carbon savings, what the LEDs use far less electricity than older lighting technologies. But we have actually got, and especially now, there's frameworks in place to allow specifiers to weight procurement, especially to luminaires that achieve maybe a better score in regards to circular economy. So if we're thinking about embodied carbon of products that they can normally typically be repaid over 1 or 2 years, we are really being much more clever now as specifiers to pick products not just for energy efficiency, but what they're doing to the environment, as well as what energy they're saving as they're put up. And that's equated to thousands of tons of CO2 every year. And I'll go on to that in numbers in a little bit. But ultimately, it's one of those easy upgrades and probably the fastest and most reliable decarbonisation projects a city can deliver. And it really is, once you put it on paper as an investor save model, quite a simple, fast, efficient way of getting more cash in your pocket as quickly as you can. So, and I'm sure it all hit all of our pockets back in 2022 or 23 when that energy crisis really hit. So when those prices surged during that time, councils, and especially Southwark, for an example, I think our bill went from 1.2 million to 2.2. So we had a massive issue and forecast of what that would look like over a period of time. And actually, we asked for an extra £2 million to accelerate that LED program because we just felt the volatility at the time of the energy market was just too much, that if we'd done it and bought it sooner, we would realise those savings and there'd be much less risk. So I think a lot of councils have been cutting one of their largest bills, and ultimately external lighting was one of those. And we're a fairly small borough at Southwark, but I know there's other boroughs with 30, 40, 50,000 assets, and it can equate to a fairly big bill. So that crisis accelerated a lot of programs, and it became the financial base for those development and cases across the rest of the country. So it's been really, really good. And what ultimately become a bit of a climate program quickly become finance resilience. So for myself, for others, it wasn't just savings on the energy. There's other savings you can make from reduced maintenance regimes as well. So talk about saving in numbers. We picked that big figure of 650 million kilowatt per hour. The consumption at the end of 24-25 was actually 295 million. So a 54% reduction, which is not necessarily where we thought it was going to be. We were hoping for bigger reductions in electricity consumption. When you look at Graham's suggestion earlier, where we've gone from a 60, 80 watt lamp down to an 8 watt lamp, there's major reductions there, but you've still got electronic gear. There's still a lot of onus on getting the right light designed. And it's not just about reducing as much as you can. So there really is, over that last decade and a half, where it's been reducing that consumption by 350 million kilowatt hours. It's a big chunk of change, and that equates to about 75,000 tons of CO2 just for external luminaires and lighting. So it's been really good. Or in my cup of tea analogy, 3.5 billion cups of tea. So this is what a typical LED transformation would look like. We've got lanterns out there at the moment that are typically anywhere between 150 to 250 watts. In some settings, and especially the higher speed roads, up to 400 watts and even 1,000 watt luminaires when you're talking about pitch lighting and other areas. But as a typical replacement, we were transferring over to LEDs that were around 40 or 80 watts. And I'd say even now, with some of the efficacy of the LED chips, the luminaires in whole, the heat sinks, the driver tech, we're even further down than that. So technology is just so fast with this that I'm sure we'll see even more future savings coming up. And that's where that 40 to 60% energy reduction comes from. So I mentioned earlier about the LEDs lasting longer. We're hoping the actual LED chips can last for anywhere between 25 to 30 years. There will be maintenance with drivers and cleaning that we have to do. But when you're talking about some of the old lamps, back in the day, we were out changing every year or every 2-3 years. You can imagine a person in a cherry picker or a mute going up, changing that. There's a big reduction, not only on costs, but carbon from that as well. So it has been a really good news story. I had to get in around designing better lighting. And if anyone on the call is a lighting designer from the lighting industry, they will know this is the most commonly overused phrase that we all use as lighting engineers. Right light, right place, right time. It is about quality of design, not just how bright something is. So we have national standards to follow. There's British standards that we design each street to. We've got really good guidance notes from people like the institutional light professionals. So we follow that. It's good practice. There's groups and professional engineering institutions that we're all part of, and we follow that. So it's about us balancing that safety, visibility, and then other environmental considerations. It's not just about sticking lights 30 meters apart down a road. There really has been some good engineering considerations, you hope, from your local authority, and especially in London. I always say good lighting should always feel natural, especially functional lighting. I think if you're noticing functional lighting, it probably hasn't been designed right, unless there's architectural pieces that we're doing. And I know Ian will talk about some of the really good architectural bits that they're doing in the city and wider impacts, like the Illuminated River project. So what are we now looking at? Modern lighting strategies. So we have dimming and trimming. So ultimately, where the light may be reduced slightly in quieter hours, we can dim that down. Trimming is something where we would turn on the lights a little bit later and we would turn off them a little bit sooner. So those varying light levels during the evening, we can either preset them with photocells that are on top of the lamp, or we can set times with a central management system, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then some locations now are using adaptive lighting. So we've got a scheme currently going at the moment that's using cameras and AIs to adjust the brightness and settings on each luminaire in a road, depending on the traffic or pedestrian activity. So it will read the road, they'll give some latency back, and it will dim that up and down based on activity, which is really clever. So it's mitigating that safety risk with just guessing when people might be using or might not those spaces. So there's that element to it, and then we're also managing light spill into homes and that ecological impact. So I mentioned wildlife previously. It's not just the wildlife, and I know I think we've got Mike on the call that was part of the Illuminated River project. There was types of fish in the River Thames that were massively affected by some of the light, and they had to take that into consideration in some of these pieces. So it really is a good place to be and work as an engineer and as a designer. And I think that lighting design increasingly supports that inclusive public space. So ultimately helping everyone access safely at night. So it's much more around lighting now being much more responsive rather than a static installation that it might have been previously. So what does the future of public lighting look like? So there's already a central management in place. And if I can give you an example of that looking like a Wi-Fi or a canopy over the city and over certain boroughs, I think Ian might mention it on his, where all of those luminaires and lights in that area are connected, and actually they can be controlled and monitored from a central point, whether that's a computer and controlled remotely. They will tell us when they're out of light. They'll tell us what energy they're consuming. It really is a new lighting networks are becoming a new digital infrastructure rather than just again a light on the end of a pole. So I've talked about supporting sensors. We've got noise sensors, air quality monitors, CCTV, telecoms equipment. There is a massive Levi funding out at the moment that's rolling out EV charging infrastructure. So as a borough, we have over 1,800 charge points on lamp columns. And I know that's going to be going thick and fast out in the country over the next couple of years. So these are becoming more of an electrical structure and a more of a smart city platform than just your normal humble lamppost. So for me, just a closing thought really, just around public lighting is that rare infrastructure intervention that can cut carbon, save money, and also improve quality of life at the same time. And I think it's rare to get that in one bundle. So over that last 10 to 15 years that the lighting industry has delivered, probably one of the most successful energy transformations, and I'd assume without anyone really knowing. And I think we can all be quite proud of that, that's happening in the background. And actually, the question isn't anymore whether we use LED lighting, but it's how we intelligently use that light to shape any cities in the future. And I think it'll be a good opportunity to go over to Ian to speak about the City of London.
Yeah, that's great. So introduction from me. Thank you. And thank you, Perry. So my name's Ian Hughes. I'm Director of Operations in the Environment Department for the City of London. I've worked at the city for almost 30 years now. Man and boy, I joined right at the very bottom. I worked my way up through different responsibilities. And about 10 years ago, that included and started to draw in this question about lighting. And a lot of what's been said before, we are building on the shoulders of people who have come before us to think about lighting. And but we are in a world of new technology with LED and with control management systems, which is a space that we were never at before. So we've had the opportunity, frankly, to play with lighting in a way that has never been had before and talk about lighting in a way that's never been talked about before. So people appreciate the Square Mile is a very different place than it was 30 years ago when I joined, and all of these buildings have gone up. And there is very much a focus about what that does for the public realm, what it does for the nature of the city, the way in which we impact the environment, and particularly when you look at the street scene at night and the skyline of the city at night. This has been a focus for quite some time. I'll say a little bit about lighting of buildings towards the end of this, but my focus is very much what it means for the street environment, the public realm, and the streets within the Square Mile. And I talk about building on the shoulders of our predecessors. We've been looking at this. I've been looking at this particularly for the last 10 years, looking at the opportunities and issues. But actually, the City of London has been looking at public lighting and being innovative about public lighting for almost 125 years. And it's quite staggering that we're still using legislation from 1900s to fix lighting on buildings in the Square Mile. If you walk around the streets of the city, you find very few lamp columns that are actually standing on street. Almost all of them are attached to buildings. And that's because the Victorians recognized that we could actually have a better public environment if we had the power to put, as it says there, the fixing of apparatus for public lighting in streets. We have the power to do that, and that means we get our lighting onto buildings right at the planning stage. So that joined upness about how public lighting works in the city has been important to us for 125 years. We also like the embankments. We like the bridges, and before Illuminated River, and we continue to light Tower Bridge outside of the Illuminated River project. We'll say a bit about in a minute. And we also have been for many years responsible for lighting St Paul's Cathedral out of the goodness of our own heart. But that continuous building development, if you look at the city skyline, it's always changing, trying to work out what does that mean? How do we manage that? Dealing with questions of light spillage. And traditionally, up until recently, the city's position was fairly ignorant of the climate impacts and the carbon impact of that lighting. It was brighter was better. It was a very masculine, strong view of the Square Mile. You wanted all your lights on all the time. The city never slept. And that was a 1980s mantra, I would say. And we've moved away from that for a whole raft of good reasons, including carbon footprint and climate action, but also a more a mature view about how we look at our public realm. And we also needed to invest in our streets and our public lighting, because the kit that we had out there 10 years ago was dying on its feet and needed that capital injection. So we were looking at these sorts of issues. You see them when you still walk around parts of London. I love the picture on the right-hand side. You go, someone's got great, let's go and light the front of our building and make it stand out. That kind of light spillage problem is just invasive in the public realm and needs to be controlled through the planning system. But in terms of public lighting, how do we make something sensitive in terms of how it interacts with our built environment was a real challenge that we wanted to try and address. So we had around 1,500 lamps. That's not just street lights, but it's also road signs. And we still have a few heritage lanterns here and there and floodlights and all the rest of it. But we had quite a significant percentage of our spend on lighting anchored around energy bills and also repairs in terms of that aging infrastructure. So the question was how to deal with all of that issue. And one of the key things we did is we weren't just insular looking at the square mile. We engaged with a much wider community about what does good lighting look like. And there was a lightning bolt moment for me personally and some of my colleagues. We were invited out to look at Lyon in France. And they've been looking at these questions about what good public lighting looks like for many, many, many years. And partly that opportunity to step away from the pure engineering side of it, they talked about lighting in a completely different way. They had a language that, even if it was coming from the French, it was still being translated in English. And they were talking about lighting being poetic, about coherent, about bad lighting being parasitical. It was a very, very different way to talk and think about lighting. And it moved us away from just saying, what can we do with technology from a lighting, an M&E engineer point of view, but more into an architectural aesthetic about what lighting should look like. And we talked about that with our members, our politicians, and they agreed. They wanted something that talked about an ambient city, a warmth in our public lighting. And the word charm was actually used for the square mile. First time I heard it, it was sort of that, again, light bulb moment, literally, when you go, you want the city to look and feel very different to what it had done. So we had a new approach. It looked at an investment in LED. It looked at an investment in a new control management system. But it said also, if we have the ability to manage our lighting, what are we going to do with it? And actually, we recognized that left a void that we needed to fill with a lighting strategy. It was about what are we going to use in terms of the approach going forward, what was important to us around lighting. So it wasn't just about road safety, road danger reduction. It wasn't just about crime and disorder, but how do we make a sense of place that also includes is that feeling of aesthetic and inclusivity in terms of our street environment. So we did public consultation and we had things really ending up in three areas around that environmental benefit, that functional sense of what lighting is delivered, and also the technology underpinning all of that. We had a lot of good public feedback across all those three areas. And the vision, we will have a vision statement for these things. We're wanting to create something that's holistic but smart. And it's not just about light, but it's about darkness. And it's about finding the balance between the light and the dark so that it creates that degree of depth around what your public realm is actually achieving. So we did put in a control management system fundamentally different to what most people were using at the time. And that's caused by, for the square mile, lots of tall buildings meant you needed this interactive node system where all of these points were talking to each other. Normal line of sight control management systems just didn't work in the square mile. So we developed that system. And now if you actually stand with a laptop, a mobile phone, you can control individual lanterns to go on and off at different times on different nights of the week. And that's a web-based system that's bouncing off around the world to come back to actually do it. It works in real time. And it's been a game changer for what we do. And what that's meant, good example, Mr. Peters Hill, just south of St. Paul's Cathedral. On the left-hand side, overly lit, really bright, really stark, and not very welcoming. And where we are now, less lighting, but we've been braver by going less lighting, warmer lighting, a smaller scale of lighting, and a more human scale is the kind of language that we've been using around that. So outcomes, £4 million investment in LED lighting for the square mile, funny enough, not that far away from some of the figures that Perry was saying. We saved just over half of our energy bill. We saved 3/4 of our CO2 emission. And we actually reduced the number of the light fittings that we had around the square mile. And that investment allowed us to pretty well halve our maintenance costs. Now, while we remained the energy costs, while we were halving the energy we were using, at the same time, the cost of energy was doubling. So actually our budget, we managed to absorb that increase by the switch to LEDs. So it was really good timing. But out of all of that, we got our real-time control system. We have that integrated fault and energy data that comes back to us. Differential lighting profiles means we have different temperatures and different lighting levels for different kinds of streets, and we can adapt that in real time. So if you have nightclubs in a particular place on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, you can have a different lighting profile those nights compared to the rest of the week. But it is softer, it's warmer, it's a more human scale, and we feel that makes our streets more accessible and feels safer. This question of doesn't have to be overly lit. That can sometimes get the alternative perception about how safe our streets actually are. So that also led to a development of a supplementary planning document, an SPD, that now we have new best practice guidance for what new buildings are going to be held accountable for in terms of having best practice in terms of their building management system for lighting. So it's, again, dialed back, dialed down to the point where you don't look at the city at night and see quite the same skyline as you did before. So it's bled into other parts of our workflow. And this is the kind of outcome. This is the Bloomberg building on Walbrook and Queen Victoria Street. And it was, again, a statement building where that engagement through the planning process led to a much different approach to negotiation with the developer about how the street was going to be lit. Their public lighting for their building is sufficient for our purposes to light the street in a very, very different way to the kind of buildings we were used to seeing. So we have different lighting effects for different areas. And these are sort of just snapshots of different spaces we have across the square mile where we were looking to establish a rhythm and an approach to that lighting that hang together and said it's okay to be different for different things for different places, but there is an overarching strategy that pulls it together. We still have lighting for special events. We have Christmas lighting. We have events to do with St. Paul's Cathedral. So that's still part of our core offer. And we're working really closely with the BIDs, the Business Improvement Districts. Last Christmas, we had more Christmas lighting than we've ever had before, funded by them. So again, that opportunity to tie all of this together in a nighttime approach to good nighttime lighting has been crucial. We've also taken the opportunity to look at commemorations. This was lighting that we did on our bridges and with in conjunction with the HRP at the Tower of London for the Queen, the passing of the Queen several years ago. And that's been provided by the piece of work that we were really keen to progress around the illuminated river. So this was the project being run to look at around a dozen bridges up and down the Thames. And we were the first party bridge owner to work with the Illuminated River Foundation, frankly, to transform the lighting of our bridges. And it reveals the architecture. It encourages people to embrace the lighting and their public space and draws people in. And it's a fantastic scheme. We are still sort of 5-6 years away since it came in. And there's still night cruises on the river going to view this. And it really transformed the way that our bridges were looked at as pieces of public art as much as actual pieces of infrastructure. And we're taking that forwards with a project that is in train at the moment to look at the lighting of St. Paul's Cathedral. Same problems to start off with. Old-fashioned lighting scheme, throwing lighting at the cathedrals, thinking that the brighter that we can make it, the better it is. These are two different images from a lighting trial that we ran about 18 months ago to say, what can we do that's different about lighting the cathedral? And this is about allowing the cathedral to breathe and reveal itself at night with a level of architectural detail that's actually better than you can see by eye during the day, by lighting it from the inside out. So we're working very closely, obviously, with the cathedral and Historic England to get the balance right. But the opportunity to transform this building is taking that message forward about what can we do differently, what can we do better to literally illuminate our public realm. So it does do, as Perry says, the approach that we've had has improved our public realm. It's saved money in terms of maintenance costs. It's allowed us to better manage our streets. And it's crucially now, in the current climate of climate action and needing to move towards net zero, it was the first and one of the very best things that we did to look at ways of actually saving energy without having to do the knee-jerk approach of switching lights off at night, which when we started, that's what a number of councils were doing to save money. We found that better way of doing it that fits the needs of the square mile. And finally, just a nod to Lucy's, is the Lighting Urban Community International. I think that's right. It is a group of major cities across the world that are interested in this piece of work and about managing their public realm lighting in this sort of proactive, dynamic way. We're part of Lucy, we're on the steering group of Lucy. And 12 months ago, we hosted a global conference for them here at the Barbican Centre and at Guildhall, where all of these cities came to the Square Mile to see what we were doing, but also that networking best practice approach. And so we signed up to this charter around embracing net zero, dealing with light pollution, embracing that aspect of health and public well-being, public engagement, and that point around the transformative power of lighting for communities and accessibility is a real key theme that we want to buy into. And I know Alderman Gowan's on the call this evening. She's been a great supporter of us, both in terms of what we've been doing for the city, but also that involvement with Lucy.
Oh, thank you very much. Not just Ian, but to all three presenters. I found that absolutely fascinating. The advances that engineering has brought to lighting. As an engineer, I would say that, but certainly not a lighting engineer. But really, really interesting to hear about the recent developments and also new ways of thinking about public lighting.